very high as Israel and Hamas go back and forth on a long-term peace deal. But while an overwhelming number of Israelis strongly back the offensive in Gaza, there are some who find serious fault with some Israeli aims and tactics. For more, let's go to Tel Aviv and Yehuda Shaul, a former Israeli army commander and combat soldier in the West Bank. He's the co-founder and director of Breaking the Silence, an Israeli veterans group that works to expose injustices and abuse against Palestinians by the Israeli military. Yehuda, good to have you with us. Yuli Novak, your group's executive director and a former Israeli Air Force officer, wrote about her time in the service in The Guardian on Monday, saying, "I believed with all my heart that we were doing what needed to be done. Things have changed, and now I can no longer have that certainty." How have things changed?
I think when Yuli, my comrade, wrote that things have changed, she doesn't necessarily say that things have changed on the ground. I think when she said things have changed, is she changed the way she sees the things and the reality and the way she understands. Because it was the same for me when I was in uniform in the beginning during the Second Intifada. I actually believed in what I've done, because when you're a soldier, you don't ask questions. It's only afterwards, towards the end of my service, when I was able to start to think about life as a civilian, that I started questioning. And I started kind of like realizing that the way I justify things to myself throughout my service didn't make sense anymore.
Now, your group's point is that the Israeli military acts not just now with what's happening in Gaza, to control Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, to break their will, to let the Palestinians know that Israeli forces are always going to be there and that they should be afraid to stand up for themselves?
We are a group of almost 1,000 Israeli veterans who served in combat units from the beginning of the Second Intifada to today. And basically we believe in a very simple thing, that our military should be an instrument of defense and not an instrument of oppression and occupation. And the problem is basically, or what we're trying to do, is to hold up a mirror in front of our society and demand from our society to take moral and civil responsibility for what's being done in its name. And what's being done in our name is a prolonged occupation that is built and designed, to maintain itself. And the way to do it is basically make Palestinians fear you. And once they get used to a level of fear, you have to increase it and increase it. And this hole has no bottom. That's why what we want to do and what we want to see happening is climbing out this hole and ending the occupation.
Right, you say that it's designed to do that, and that this leads to all sorts of abuses, that it's institutional, and that the abusive behavior is policy that's set by the Israeli Defense Forces?
Look, one of the main things I've done during my service was what we call in the military making our presence felt. What does it mean? The concept, the idea is that Palestinians, if they'll get the feeling that the IDF is all the time everywhere, they'll be afraid to attack. So in order to basically make them feel this way, you make your presence felt. And the way it manifests itself, in my time, I served over a year in Hebron, which is the largest Palestinian city in the West Bank. We used to have 24/7 patrols walking in the old city of Hebron. You start your night shift patrol, 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning, 8-hour shift, walk in the streets, bump into a random house. These are not houses we had intelligence about. Sergeant leads the patrol, chooses a random house. I was a sergeant, wake up the family, tear apart the place, finish searching the house, go out to the street, knock on another house, a random house, bump into the house, wake up another family, search the place. And that's how you were past your 8-hour shift, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from September 2000 when the Second Intifada started till today. It didn't stop for 1 second. The idea is that every Palestinian will feel that the military is right here. You never know when we're going to show up, what we're going to do, how it's going to start, how it's going to end. It's to do what we call in the military to create the feeling of being pursued. And that is, these are basically phrases we used in our briefings.
Well, how do you respond to an IDF spokesman who says that your group is just about smearing the Israeli military, that the examples you've brought up represent a minuscule portion of Israeli soldiers, and that if any of the bad behavior your group has uncovered had been reported to the IDF, that the soldiers who did those kinds of things would be behind bars?
Look, this tactic about making your presence felt is an official policy that the IDF spokesperson before approved, that's one of the things they do. And that's one of the things we do. So this is not one rogue soldier, that's the mission. Now, the other thing I would say is, I don't, on a very, very deep level, I don't believe the problem is the IDF. I believe the problem is the political mission the IDF is sent to carry out. When your political mission is to maintain a prolonged occupation over another people, that's how it looks like. And that's what's going on in Gaza in a way. Think of it. We had Operation Summer Rains, we had Operation Warm Winter, we had Operation Autumn Clouds, we had Operation Cast Lead, we had Operation Pillar of Defense, and you ask yourself, where is it going? So that's the idea, that's the big strategy, that every 2 years we'll have an operation, every operation will be more aggressive than the previous one, and the death toll will just rise, and we're going just for another operation. Actually, what we need to do is to rethink our strategies and to look for a different way out.
So you think this operation would have happened even if Hamas hadn't been shooting 100 rockets a day into Israel? And I do want to end with asking you, I guess, a final question. Is Israel doing what it can? Do you believe it's doing what it can to avoid civilian casualties in Gaza as it claims? And on the other hand, do you think the Palestinians are putting their civilians in harm's way by putting missiles and other armaments in populated areas?
Look, you're not going to hear good words about Hamas from my mouth. Hamas is a terrorist organization that is trying to target and arm as many civilians possible inside Israel, no doubt. But sadly enough, I don't believe Israel is doing everything we can to avoid civilian casualties. Just look at this new tactic that is basically in this operation turned to be a big strategy and upfront admitted by ministers and generals, which we call this knock on the roof. You take a house, which is a house of a Hamas activist, yeah, somewhere in the middle of Gaza, and that suddenly turns this building into a legitimate target, even though it doesn't pose a direct threat to our forces there. And you basically throw a small missile on the roof, or call the family and ask them to leave, and after 10, 20 minutes, you bomb the place, even though you know there are civilians inside. Now, this idea that because you ask civilians to leave the building, and they haven't listened to you, they deserve the death penalty is outrageous. And I think that just shows us that every operation we tend to cross another more red line that we haven't crossed before, and slowly, slowly we get used to it. Because that's what happens, I think, to us as a society. 47 years of occupation, we're not able to feel empathy with Palestinians. We're not able to see them as equal human beings. And just like I, as a soldier, the first Palestinian house I bursted in, I still felt something and I doubted. And that, the face of the children brought me to start to ask questions. But the 10th time I did it, I just got used to it. So we are here also. The first operation in Gaza, we were shocked. But the numbers of death toll of civilians is just rising up, and we're not willing, we're not able as a society to understand and realize and put question marks, and that's very, very saddening for me.
Yehuda Shaul from the Breaking the Silence group, thank you very much for joining us.